Have you ever caught your reflection in the mirror and felt a sudden jolt of fear? Noticed a streak of silver or a thinning spot creeping in, then instantly thought about how to hide it? That quiet dread, the fear of being judged as old or unattractive, is a slow-burning ache most of us know all too well. But for celebrities, that pain is magnified beyond imagination. You remember the black legends we grew up admiring: flawless style, perfectly groomed hair, and an effortless confidence every time they appeared on screen. They seemed untouchable, perfect. Yet the truth was far more brutal than we ever suspected. Behind the blinding lights and glamorous smiles were deeply vulnerable souls guarding a humiliating secret. A secret so terrifying they were willing to sacrifice their health, and even their lives, to hide it. Picture a leading man, adored by millions, secretly using an eyeliner pencil night after night to draw hair onto his scalp, disguising the empty patches where nothing would grow. Or a singer who relentlessly poured harsh chemicals onto his head for years, desperate to conceal painful sores and disfiguring keloid scars beneath carefully styled braids. What you're about to hear is the unfiltered truth: 9 black celebrities whose hidden battle with baldness remained buried for decades. And it begs the question, what horrifying realities were concealed behind the icons we once worshipped as princes of the screen and gods of the stage? Wilson Pickett, the wounds hidden beneath strangled wigs. Late one night in 1968, inside the cramped dressing room of Harlem's Apollo Theater, Wilson Pickett sat frozen before a wide vanity mirror. Empty hairspray cans littered the counter, towels soaked through with sweat piled at his feet. Beneath the merciless glow of the lights, he slowly lifted his fedora, exposing a truth the world was never meant to witness. The entire front of his hairline was gone, erased. In its place lay a smooth, lifeless expanse of scalp stretching back toward the crown. Years of relentless pressing, tightening, and pulling had left him with traction alopecia, permanent damage carved into his flesh by obsession. He stared at the exposed skin with quiet disgust, seeing not vulnerability but decay. A superstar, he believed, was never allowed to look fragile. Preparing for each performance became a ritual of silent torment. Wilson reached for a custom hairpiece made from real human hair, laid it carefully over the barren void, then threaded thin fishing line through the remaining tufts at the sides and back of his head. With his own hands, he pulled the lines tight, too tight, yanking his scalp backward until his temples throbbed, swollen and flushed a furious red. Once on stage, beneath the scorching heat of the spotlights, thick, salty sweat streamed into the raw scars left by wire and adhesive. The pain burned like fire against open wounds. Still, Wilson howled through his high-octane hits, jaw clenched, teeth grinding, refusing to let agony steal the show. His infamous temper was never simple rage, it was armor. A shield forged from humiliation and old trauma. A longtime assistant once recalled a moment that explained everything. Backstage, Wilson overheard a group of young performers whispering. They mocked him, calling him the bald man borrowing hair from the dead, a cruel reference to the high-end wigs woven from donated human hair. Wilson froze in the shadows. His fists clenched until his knuckles went white, his eyes burning with shame. The memory unlocked older wounds, early days when critics sneered about his forehead, joked that it ran halfway down his skull. Those insults cut deep, reshaping him into a man who chose intimidation over pity. He wanted fear, not sympathy. During one rain-soaked outdoor concert, the adhesive finally betrayed him. As water poured down, the hairpiece began to slip. For half the set, Wilson sang while gripping his head with one hand, disguising panic as a wild, soulful dance move. The moment the final note faded, he sprinted off stage, refusing fans, dodging cameras, disappearing into a waiting car. Years later, in a rare private conversation with a trusted Jet magazine writer, after the doors were locked and the flashes were gone, Wilson allowed the mask to fall. His hand trembled as he touched the smooth skin of his scalp. "Look at this," he whispered. "The world worships Wicked Pickett, the strong, the unbreakable. But they don't see the coward behind the lights, watching himself disappear strand by strand beneath these strangled wigs." The soul legend spent his life locked in combat with his own body, enduring constant physical agony to protect an image of power and perfection, because to him, vulnerability was the one thing the audience was never allowed to see. George Clinton. George Clinton. The chemical battlefield hidden beneath the rainbow braids. For decades, soul and funk devotees have revered George Clinton as a high priest of the avant-garde, a visionary who appeared on stage draped in otherworldly costumes, neon bright hair extensions spilling over his shoulders like a fractured rainbow. Those vibrant braids, threaded with shimmering beads, became an indelible symbol of freedom, rebellion, and black pride, a visual manifesto etched into the memory of a generation. Yet behind that electrifying facade of boundless energy lay a painful truth, carefully buried beneath layers of dense synthetic hair. That radiant crown was never just an artistic choice. It was a velvet curtain drawn over a scalp ravaged by chemicals, a lifelong consequence of relentless exposure to high-concentration hair relaxers. The damage began in the 1950s, inside New Jersey barbershops, when George was still a young man chasing the era's gold standard of grooming, the conch. To achieve that bone-straight, slicked-back look, he turned his own head into a laboratory, applying the cheapest and most toxic straightening formulas, harsh mixtures heavy with ammonia and lye. The highly alkaline chemicals burned with brutal intensity, incinerating hair follicles at the root and leaving behind a scarred terrain of patchy baldness and jagged keloids. By the time George Clinton reached the summit of his career, his scalp had become a chemical war zone of unhealed burns. The multicolored extensions were not fashion, they were camouflage, anchored to the few remaining islands of healthy skin to conceal the necrosis beneath. Each day, the crushing weight of that artificial mane pulled relentlessly at old scars, triggering skull-splitting headaches he endured in silence long after the stage lights faded into darkness. This hidden suffering surfaced years later through the intimate recollections of Larry Leroy Preston, Funkadelic's bassist and George's personal hairstylist, who logged thousands of miles beside him on the tour bus. In a 2014 music memoir, Larry recalled endless nights at deserted highway rest stops, and one haunting moment backstage at Madison Square Garden in the mid-1970s. He watched George hunched over a makeshift sink, face twisted in agony as old extensions were torn away, revealing inflamed, peeling patches of scalp that bled openly. The air was thick with hair dye and cigarette smoke when Larry overheard a reporter sneer from the wings, staring at the raw truth. "Look at that withered old bald man piling 7-colored rags on his head to hide the oozing graveyard underneath." The words cut deep, driving George further into obsession, demanding heavier, thicker wigs to preserve the myth. To the world, he remained a superstar, eccentric, fearless, endlessly fresh. But years later, beneath the dim flicker of an old barbershop light, George stared at the hardened scars on his scalp and spoke to Larry with a voice heavy with bitterness. "They only see a beautiful rainbow. I'm the one who stays awake all night with these chemical burns. I poison myself just to wear a glamorous shadow. And now, there's nothing left but a barren graveyard under this pile of wigs." Ron O'Neal. Ron O'Neal. The untold death sentence his hair paid for the glow of Superfly. In the early 1970s, Ron O'Neal wasn't merely an actor, he was a cultural wildfire. His breakout role as the impeccably dressed drug dealer in Superfly crowned him an untouchable symbol of black masculinity. He had it all: a chiseled face, razor-sharp suits, and above all, that long, silky, flowing hair worn like a badge of power and pride. To the world, he was flawless. But behind the camera lights and adoration lived a quiet, devastating horror. To force a black man's natural curls into a straight, silk-smooth ideal, Ron paid with his own flesh. Years of ultra-potent alkaline relaxers, paired with relentless heat from blow dryers, ravaged his scalp beyond repair. His hair follicles were chemically burned into extinction, leaving behind hardened, scarred skin, raw, damaged, and incapable of healing. What the public worshipped was built on pain no one was meant to see. That truth only surfaced years later through the haunting testimony of actress Sheila Frazier, who starred alongside him. In 2005, on TV1's Unsung, she exposed the hidden torment that defined his private life. She recalled a summer morning in Harlem in 1972, when she accidentally opened the door to Ron's private makeup room. What she saw stopped her cold. Ron sat perfectly still, eyes hollow, staring at his reflection as two makeup artists worked frantically over a scalp that was patchy, inflamed, and ravaged. The hair millions adored had been eaten away by chemicals, replaced by angry red skin weeping from severe infection. At the time, wigs for male actors were forbidden, too easy to spot under high-resolution lenses or dislodged during action scenes. With massive profits riding on his romantic image, producers refused that option outright. Instead, Ron was forced into a daily ritual of deception that bordered on cruelty. Before filming each day, he endured a 3-hour ordeal. Makeup artists smeared black charcoal powder mixed with greasy sheep's wool fat over his bald patches to seal them. Then, with razor-sharp black pencils, they drew individual fake hairs directly onto his festering sores. Sheila recalled, her voice heavy with grief, how under the brutal New York sun, the grease and charcoal melted, blending with sweat and infected fluid. The mixture ran down onto Ron's pristine white shirt collars in dark, foul-smelling streaks. When others rested between takes, Ron vanished into shadows so the artists could repair that collapsing black mask. In those moments, there was no superstar, only humiliation, exhaustion, and quiet rage etched across his face. The breaking point came at Superfly's Chicago premiere in 1974. As fans surged around him, a paparazzi photographer caught a single fatal moment, Ron lowering his head as he slipped into his car. The flash revealed everything: a smooth, slick scalp, charcoal peeling away in filthy patches like rotting bark. Though his manager spent a fortune buying and destroying the photo that same night, the damage was done. Rumors ignited, whispers spread, and the myth began to crumble. Ron O'Neal became trapped inside the very image that made him famous, haunted, exposed, and slowly destroyed by a beauty standard that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Bobby DeBarge, the mummy's rap, and the horrific secret of his final days. In the fading glow of the late 1970s, if anyone truly deserved the crown prince of soul, it was Bobby DeBarge. Mothers and grandmothers of that era still remember the sound of his soaring, honey-drenched falsetto as the unmistakable heartbeat of the group Switch. Bobby didn't just sing like an angel, he looked like one. His delicate features, magnetic smile, and especially those long, lustrous curls made him a living fantasy, a man whose image was as intoxicating as his voice. Every appearance was polished, every strand of hair meticulously styled, as if perfection itself were a responsibility he carried onto the stage. But behind the blinding lights and adoring screams, an unspeakable tragedy was quietly consuming him. HIV/AIDS, a diagnosis that, at the time, was treated as a ruthless death sentence, began to ravage Bobby's body. Worse than the illness itself was what it stole first, the very symbol of his beauty and identity. This was not the gentle thinning of age. It was sudden, violent, merciless. His once thick hair fell out in clumps, leaving behind a scalp that was dry, bruised, scarred, and visibly diseased. For a man whose image was his lifeblood, watching himself decay in the mirror was a form of daily torture. To protect this devastating secret from the public, Bobby vanished. He withdrew completely from show business, imprisoning himself inside a quiet, isolated home where no one could witness what he had become. In the final stages of his illness, even during the suffocating heat of California summers, Bobby never allowed his head to be seen uncovered. Instead, he wrapped it tightly in layers of expensive silk scarves, knot after knot, like a mummy desperately trying to conceal a body in decay. One of his younger brothers later recalled a terrifying moment during an emergency hospital visit in 1994. When a doctor asked Bobby to remove the scarf for examination, he panicked, trembling violently, fighting with all the strength his failing body had left. Beneath the silk was a haunting sight, a scalp completely bare, shriveled, and stained with dark, soot-colored blotches left by the disease. Bobby would rather endure unbearable pain than allow anyone to see what lay atop his head. His fixation had grown beyond insecurity. It had become a psychological prison, a living nightmare that dictated every movement of his final days. The tragedy reached its heartbreaking climax on Christmas Eve, 1994, at the family home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, only months before his death. According to his brother Randy DeBarge, what should have been a warm, joyful night filled with laughter and glowing Christmas lights turned into something hauntingly somber. Bobby demanded that all overhead lights be turned off, even the colorful strands on the tree, allowing only a few candles to flicker weakly in the corners of the room. He sat hunched in a large armchair like a ghost, his face pale and hollow. But what devastated Randy most was the silk scarf wrapped suffocatingly tight around Bobby's head, wound again and again, like a final mask protecting the last fragments of his dignity. Randy later said he could see pure terror in his brother's eyes, the fear that even the smallest beam of light might expose his ravaged scalp to the people he loved most. As the family endured the evening in strained silence, a small grandchild, playing near the tree, tripped and instinctively grabbed at the trailing edge of Bobby's scarf to keep from falling. In a single, horrifying instant, the fabric shifted. Under the dim candlelight, a patch of wrinkled, darkened scalp was revealed to everyone in the room. The silence shattered. Bobby let out a scream, raw, primal, and filled with humiliation. He clawed at his head with skeletal hands, his body shaking uncontrollably. Before anyone could reach him, he bolted from the chair and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, locking himself away in his room. Perhaps what terrified Bobby DeBarge most was not death itself, but the thought of the world seeing its fallen angel stripped of beauty, dignity, and illusion. In the end, he chose to live like a phantom, hidden in shadows, embracing loneliness over exposure, fading quietly into darkness rather than allowing the world to witness his ruin. Sylvester. Disco lights, and a slow disappearance hidden beneath a towering wig. In the fading glow of the late 1970s, the world seemed to pause whenever Sylvester stepped onto a stage. The undisputed queen of disco didn't just set dance floors ablaze with that otherworldly falsetto, he shattered every rule of identity and expression. Sequined gowns shimmered like galaxies, silhouettes defied gender, and crowning it all were those legendary wigs, colossal, radiant, and impossible to ignore. But as the AIDS crisis swept through San Francisco in the late 1980s, that brilliance became shadowed by quiet devastation. The disease didn't only drain Sylvester's body, it stole his hair, strand by strand, turning every performance into an act of painful concealment. The truth emerged years later through the memories of his closest confidant and longtime manager, Timmy McNeely. In The Fabulous Sylvester, The Legend, the Music, the 70s in San Francisco, published in 2005 by Joshua Gamson, Timmy recalled the harrowing months leading up to Sylvester's final performances in 1988. By then, the disco monarch was painfully gaunt, reduced to little more than skin and bone. Even more devastating, his natural hair was completely gone, not a single strand left, destroyed by HIV and the brutal high-dose antibiotics of the era. Yet Sylvester refused to let the world see him fade. He made one fierce demand: the wigs had to be bigger, heavier, more extravagant than ever before. Only those towering crowns could conceal a barren scalp marred by deep violet lesions from Kaposi's sarcoma. Timmy said the most haunting moments always came after the applause died. When the lights went dark and they returned to the dressing room, Sylvester would collapse into a chair, gasping for air. As Timmy carefully lifted the weight of the wig from his head, Sylvester would stare into the mirror, at a skull left pale, hollow, and completely bare. In that reflection, the star vanished. What remained was a man standing at the edge of death. Each time the wig came off, Sylvester would fall into a long, wordless silence, feeling himself disappear with every strand that had already fallen away. In the summer of 1988, during San Francisco's Gay Freedom Day parade, though barely strong enough to stand and confined to a wheelchair, Sylvester insisted on appearing in a dazzling blonde wig and a breathtaking outfit. Timmy remembered him adjusting the hair to cover his sunken temples, then whispering, "They came to see a queen, Timmy. Don't let them see this hollowed-out corpse." When Sylvester took his final breath in December 1988, he left one last command, an act of pride until the very end. He was to be laid to rest in his most magnificent costume, crowned with his most perfect wig. And there he lay, radiant and regal, as if preparing for one final tour, this time to another world. Sylvester chose to leave this life as an immortal legend, carrying the truth of his ravaged scalp and disease-scarred body into the earth with him. To him, that wig was never just fashion. It was armor, a defiant manifesto against death itself. He wanted the world to remember the disco icon glowing beneath colored lights, not the fragile patient conquered by a virus. Eddie Kendricks. Eddie Kendricks, the fatal cost of stardom and the quiet tragedy of pride that still haunts Motown lovers of the 1960s and 1970s. More than just the angel-voiced lead singer of The Temptations, Eddie was the very image of elegance. His sky-high falsetto floated effortlessly above the music, while his tall, slender frame and immaculately groomed hair made him look less like a man and more like a statue carved for the spotlight. To the public, he was perfection incarnate. Yet it was this relentless devotion to his image, this fierce pride in appearing flawless, that would lead Eddie Kendricks into one of the most heartbreaking decisions in music history, turning away from life itself to preserve the look of a star. The chilling truth only came to light years later through the regret-heavy recollections of Otis Williams, Eddie's close friend and the last surviving founding member of The Temptations. Otis would later recall a moment in 1991 that still haunted him. During a routine medical checkup in Birmingham, Alabama, Eddie was diagnosed with lung cancer. Doctors immediately recommended chemotherapy, explaining that it could extend his life. But there was a catch, one devastating side effect. The treatment would cause him to lose all of his hair. For most patients, it was a painful but acceptable trade. For Eddie Kendricks, a man who had built his entire identity around elegance and beauty, it felt like a death sentence of another kind. Otis remembered Eddie locking eyes with him, his voice calm but filled with terrifying resolve. Eddie said he would rather die as the beautiful icon fans adored than live a few more years as a bald, broken patient. Standing at the crossroads between survival and self-image, Eddie made his choice. "I'd rather leave this world as a Motown gentleman," he told Otis, "than let the fans see me stripped of everything they loved." As the cancer quietly ravaged his body, irony delivered its cruelest blow. Even without chemotherapy, Eddie's hair began to thin from sheer physical collapse. Each morning, seeing strands scattered across his pillow tormented him more deeply than the disease itself. To Eddie, losing his hair felt like losing his soul. When preparing for what would become his final tour with former bandmates, Eddie refused to appear weak or diminished on stage. He endured hours seated motionless while stylists performed an agonizingly intricate hair extension process. Silk-fine synthetic strands were painstakingly tied to the few fragile hairs still clinging to his scalp, desperately masking the widening bald patches, pale, ghost-like scars at the crown of his head. Eddie demanded perfection. Not a single inch of scalp was allowed to show. Every tight knot pulled against skin already inflamed and fragile, sending sharp, stabbing pain through his head. Time and again, Eddie clenched his jaw, refusing to cry out, refusing to break the illusion. But no matter how flawless the hairpiece appeared, it could not fool death. Under the blinding lights of Cleveland in late 1991, audiences noticed a haunting contrast. Eddie's hair remained glossy, styled, and immaculate, but his skin had turned ashen, gray, and hollow. Even layers of makeup couldn't hide the truth, a body quietly dying from within. Eddie Kendricks passed away in October 1992. Until his final breath, he preserved the image he cherished, but the price was his life. He left this world as the elegant Motown gentleman he always wanted to be, carrying the secret of that brutal choice into eternity, and leaving behind a sobering lesson about vanity, pride, and the silent suffering hidden behind the spotlight. Paul Williams. Paul Williams. The shame of the eyeliner pen. The black sweat of the spotlight. Few people ever knew that each time the Temptations glided onto the stage, Paul Williams carried more than his soaring, velvet-smooth voice. He carried a quiet terror that tightened his chest with every step. Beneath the flawless choreography and radiant smiles lay a private torment hidden under the blazing stage lights. A scalp ravaged by hereditary alopecia while he was still painfully young. To preserve the illusion of perfection demanded by fame, Paul resorted to a ritual as degrading as it was desperate. Not a wig. Not a miracle cure. Just a cheap black eyeliner pen. Before every show at the world-renowned Apollo Theater, he would lock himself alone in his dressing room, hands shaking as he drew thick, dark lines directly onto his bare scalp. Stroke by stroke, he tried to erase the truth, praying the glare of the lights would blur reality for the thousands of eyes staring up at him. But the line never survived the finale. As the show peaked and the heat from hundreds of high-wattage lamps scorched the stage, Paul's sweat poured freely. Then came the horror. Salted perspiration fused with ink, sending black rivulets streaming from his hairline down his face, staining his crisp white collar like tears made of coal. The crowd roared in blissful ignorance, while Paul lived a waking nightmare, singing, dancing, smiling through sheer panic, wiping his face in secret, terrified that the truth would spill before the world. That humiliation cracked the soul of a proud man. After the curtain fell, Paul often sat alone in the shadows backstage, scrubbing his scalp until it burned, until it bled, trying to erase the stubborn stains and the shame they represented. The pressure to remain flawless slowly crushed him, driving him deeper into depression and alcohol night after night. This torment was later recalled with heartbreaking clarity by Melvin Franklin, the group's bass singer and Paul's closest friend. Melvin was the one who waited backstage the longest, who saw what the audience never did. He remembered one night in a hotel room after a show, finding Paul furiously rubbing his head with a washcloth until the skin tore, desperate to remove the black residue. Paul looked at him with hollow, defeated eyes and whispered, "They love the guy up there, the one with the smooth black hair. But look at me. I have to paint my own head every night like a cheap clown. I'd rather they forget my name than see what's really under this." The tragedy of his hair and the collapse of his dignity helped pave the path to Paul Williams' devastating death in 1973 at just 34 years old. In truth, Paul died long before the gunshot echoed inside that car in Detroit. He had been fading night after night at the Apollo. Each time the ink melted under the spotlight, another piece of him slipped away. What remained was a haunting lesson about the brutal cost of manufactured perfection and how even legends can bleed beneath the lights. Sammy Davis Jr., 30 years beneath a falling crown and the burn of deadly glue. In the grand panorama of 20th century American entertainment, Sammy Davis Jr. was crowned the ultimate showman. He could sing, dance, act, crack jokes, and command instruments with a lightning-fast energy no one else could match. On stage, he embodied mid-century cool, immaculate suits, a radiant smile, and jet black hair sculpted to perfection. Yet behind that polished image lived a private war few ever imagined. For more than 3 decades, Sammy battled a secret torment. His toupees, both his lifeline and his deepest fear. This hidden struggle was later revealed with painful honesty by Bert Boyar, a childhood friend and the author of The Little Black Man, a biography that stripped away the myth to expose the man beneath. In those tear-stained pages, Boyar didn't just chronicle a legend's brilliance. He laid bare the suffering Sammy endured far from the spotlight. According to Boyar, Sammy began losing his hair at an alarmingly young age, worn down by relentless sleepless nights and the crushing weight of racism in segregated America. To preserve the illusion of flawlessness demanded by a merciless public, he turned to exquisitely crafted hairpieces. But tragedy followed genius. Sammy was a ferocious dancer, spins sharp as razors, movements explosive and fast. His greatest terror wasn't aging or fading fame. It was the nightmare that his hairpiece might fly off mid-performance under blinding stage lights. To him, that wouldn't have been an accident. It would have been a public execution of dignity. To prevent that fate, Sammy subjected himself to ritualized self-torture. Before every show, inside dressing rooms thick with chemical fumes, he used nearly triple the normal amount of industrial-strength adhesive, pouring the viscous glue directly onto his scalp and pressing the toupee down until agony dissolved into numbness. As he performed, body heat and blazing stage lights cooked the glue into his skin. It seeped into his pores, unleashing stabbing pain, like thousands of needles boring into his skull. Boyar wrote that behind every roaring ovation stood a man silently enduring torture that ravaged both body and soul. Night after night, Sammy would stand before the mirror, peeling away the hairpiece with harsh alcohol solvents. Often, layers of already damaged scalp came off with it, raw, bleeding, and inflamed. Alone behind the dressing room door, he wrestled with a haunting question. Do they love my talent, or just the illusion held together by this glue? The suffering reached its peak in Sammy's secret visits to Dr. Robert Benjamin, a Beverly Hills dermatologist sworn to silence. In confidential medical notes, the doctor recorded a chilling truth. Sammy's scalp no longer resembled normal human skin. It was thickened, scarred, bruised, and peeling, destroyed by decades of chemical abuse. The price of perfection was nights spent sleeping upright, terrified that resting his head would shift the toupee and rip open fresh wounds. Sammy Davis Jr. lived imprisoned inside a gilded cage, where every flawless step on stage was a gamble with a lethal adhesive. After each performance, tears often fell in silence as he stripped away the mask in front of the mirror. That bone-deep pain was the hidden cost of greatness, a reminder that long before the applause, he had been forced to bury his true self to survive. Billy Stewart. Billy Stewart, the flawless mask and the brutal cost of pride. At the height of soul music's golden age, Billy Stewart stood apart as a rare phenomenon, a vocalist blessed with a scatting technique so fluid and electrifying it felt almost otherworldly. Yet behind those intoxicating melodies lived a man haunted by a quiet, relentless fear, his own reflection. Big-bodied and losing his hair, Billy understood the unspoken cruelty of show business. There was no mercy for a man who was both massive and bald, not on those stages, not in that era. The truth surfaced only in hushed recollections from the musicians who shared the road with him, the ones who saw him when the curtain fell. They remember a man who never truly exhaled. While other performers wiped off makeup and loosened their collars, Billy remained frozen in place, his wig locked tightly to his head. It was styled beyond realism, jet black, glossy, stiff with perfect curls, so rigid it looked sculpted from stone. Even under the punishing summer heat, as sweat streamed down his face in 100-degree air, that hair never shifted, not even a fraction of an inch. Even the era's most respected black magazines, Jet and Ebony, noticed the contradiction. Beneath glowing praise for his talent, perceptive writers sensed something darker. The more immaculate Billy appeared, the more despair seemed to breathe through the cracks. His obsessive grooming wasn't vanity, it was survival. He was trying, desperately, to erase the outline of his own body, to force audiences to see only polish, only control. For Billy, wigs were never fashion. They were a gas mask, protection against discrimination, mockery, and the poisonous stare of 1960s America. He knew the rules well. As a black artist, he was already fighting racism at every turn. One visible flaw, a bald patch, a moment of vulnerability, and the industry would shred him into a punchline on national television. That fear revealed itself one terrifying night at Harlem's legendary Apollo Theater. An anonymous musician later recalled accidentally stepping into Billy's private dressing room during intermission. The air was thick with industrial glue and scorched by the breath of an old hairdryer. There sat Billy, hunched before the mirror, forcing the edges of his wig onto a scalp raw and inflamed from chemical burns. This wasn't grooming. It was punishment, a ritual of pain. He chose suffocating heat, glue mixing with sweat into a maddening itch, rather than let the world see his true face. To Billy Stewart, being labeled an overweight, bald man felt worse than death. His story ended in January 1970 on a frozen road in North Carolina. Only 33 years old, Billy lost control of his car, which plunged into the dark waters of the Neuse River. When his body was recovered, some said the only thing that seemed to linger on the surface was the illusion he had spent his life protecting. Billy left this world carrying his secret with him, sinking silently into the depths, ensuring he would be remembered as the sharp-dressed man with hair that never moved. He was an icon, one who ultimately chose an underwater grave to preserve the dignity he believed defined him. Behind every dazzling spotlight lie quiet corners these 9 legends fought to hide. The elegance we admire is often a final act of defiance against time, illness, and the suffocating weight of fame. If these stories moved you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Stay with us as we continue into the shadows, uncovering the untold truths behind the world's most iconic legends.